It's intro time. Intro time. Intro time. Hell yeah. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedal Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Safari Podcast YouTube Zoo Thing Crazy Wild Bandwagon. It's great to have you. I have really been anticipating this episode for a hot minute now because Jack Miele, who we will welcome into the crazy wild Safari Pedals world in just a moment, is going to be on the show, and we are going to be diving into all things audio, mixing and his approach to mixing as he comes from the analog world, so we're going to get his take on that, recording techniques, mistakes he sees in up-and-coming producers and engineers, and tips he has to correct those mistakes, being a brand audio business, his approach and view on those things, and overall producer, engineer, musicianship. Slay! I'm really excited to dive in and just hear and learn from what he has to say, and I feel like there's not much more for me to add to this intro. So, guys, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Jack Miele.
Hey, Abby, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for hopping on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And welcome to all your listeners as well.
Yes, guys, welcome. Before we dive into today's episode, let's start with who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, well, as you said, my name is Jack Miele. I'm a New Orleans-based producer, engineer, multi-instrumentalist, composer, songwriter. I've been in this industry a long time. I've been a professional musician for about 33 years. I've been a producer engineer for 22 of those years. I've owned 3 or 4 commercial studios in the city over the last 20 years. And I've just been doing this a long time, and luckily I'm able to make some headway and some money in this industry, and work on some great projects and work with some great, fine artists. That's sort of my story. I'm somebody who is also, self-taught. I'm not somebody who went to school for this. I basically just learned as I went and learned from my mistakes, and triumphed from my successes,
Absolutely. I want to ask you, since you do so many things, like you said, compose, production, mixing, what kind of first came in the chain for you, and what got you into the audio world in the first place?
What first came in the chain was me being a guitar player. I was actually a drummer first. Still, that's sort of where my heart lies. But I don't know why. I always say guitar chose me. I didn't choose it, because I really wanted to be a drummer. And I was a drummer in bands for a few years, but I just kept being drawn to this instrument, and I didn't know why. And even still to this day, when I listen to music, the first thing I hear is the drums. I don't hear guitar the first thing. I'm listening to the pocket. I'm listening to the kick drum patterns, things like that. And like I'm sure won awards in some third world country in air drumming competitions. but I definitely love drums, but I kept being drawn to guitar. I got very good at it very quickly. I started at around 15 becoming a pro musician. I started doing gigs, and those were my first paying gigs. And I didn't do nearly the amount of gigs I do now. I mean, I still play probably 150 days a year, but I was getting paid for those dates. And that was something that was a whole, mind blown, whole new world. Like, I can get paid to do this, To shorten the rest of the story, I started doing gigs, and then naturally with gigs comes bands, and naturally with bands comes writing and things like that. And we would go into the studio and record our songs. And I think the transition to engineering, producing came from the fact that whenever we would go into record, I would hear the songs the way I heard them in my head. The records would come out, and this was back in the 90s, the mid 90s, and it just wouldn't sound the way that I heard it, in my head, because we weren't going to the power station or Hit Factory. We were going to, this was back in the days of like ADAT. We were going into like these little ADAT studios and recording there. And I'm like, why doesn't it sound like, Dr. Feelgood or whatever? So I was so bummed at that. So I started to learn just because I wanted to be able to make my songs sound the way I heard them in my head. And boy, did that learning curve take a long time. So I really did come from an analog world. It started with my band in ADAT studios, but then I went and I got an internship when I was 18 or 19 at a studio in New Orleans that was 2-inch tape. It had 2-inch tape, had a Neve console, had 8 ATs, had, but there was no Pro Tools, not, there wasn't a screen to be found. The only screen you saw in the whole studio was the one that ran the Uptown automation on the console. And that was like the old computer looked like it was running DOS or something, like it was, there was nothing technologically like Pro Tools that existed. So everything was with your ears, and records took a lot longer to make, back then. That's where I came from. And then eventually that studio closed down, and when it did, the owner was cool enough to sell me some of the gear. So what I did was all the money that I made from gigging, I essentially put back into investing into gear instead of investing in education. The education was the internship, and I was just around. Like, even when I wasn't working the internship, I was hanging out at sessions. That's one of the best pieces of advice, excuse me, that I could give any of your young listeners is you got to hang out. Go to places where bands or musicians or artists that you want to be like are going to be, and hang out, because it's going to rub off. You're going to learn things and watch and see things. And I was like a sponge. I was just taking this all in, how bands worked. And I got to like witness some, like, at the time, some famous bands in the studio doing their thing. And I was just a fly on the wall, just watching how it all went down. I took those lessons, and the learning curve still wasn't there. Like back in the old days, back in the 1900s, we would take an entire day. I mean, I'm talking about an entire 10-hour day just to get drum sounds, and spend all day tweaking it. And then they would come in the next day, and we'd still have to tweak it because the drummer who was going to be the drummer, he's going to hit differently. So all the gain stages had to be readjusted and things like that. It was something that was fascinating, to do and to watch how much thought went into it.
Would you say that's something that's lost nowadays, that thought and intention behind getting the sounds in the first place?
I don't know that it's lost as much as it's not as prioritized. I don't like blanket statements, so I'm not going to say that everybody's like this or whatever, but I from what I can see, it's not as prioritized, especially in the smaller studios. So I have a smaller studio now, but I know exactly how to get sounds in that studio. I know exactly what to do, exactly what to like, but space is a commodity in that studio. It's kind of like, it's almost like a New York studio, like the smaller New York studios. The smaller studios are already at a disadvantage with space. So you have to really take more time. I'll try to really dial things in and make them sound great, because unfortunately, with a small space, you can't leave things set up. I can't leave a drum set set up all the time, or else, you're tripping around it, and people are stepping on the cables, and, you just have to. So every time we do drums, we have to strike. We strike the drums and put them away. The dialing in of the sounds is something that I take very seriously, because there's an old saying, crap in, crap out.
Since you also have so much experience in the analog world, I'd love to also get your take on perhaps more mistakes that you see maybe in up-and-coming producers and engineers, and perhaps also tips to fix it as well.
One thing that I notice is the importance of mic technique is not as utilized. I've seen, people who are more neophytes, that they're just starting, and they sort of just start throwing mics wherever they think. And it's, we have this thing now called Google. It's like where you could really find some great information if you just Google where to mic something. But that's the thing, is that that's just a starting point. Every instrument is different. Every person is different. For instance, the smallest things make a huge difference. How do you mic a tenor saxophone?
That's a very good question. I have not mic'd a tenor saxophone.
Well, okay, so where do you think you mic a tenor saxophone? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, guys, I've never really deeply thought about miking a tenor saxophone. Can I? I'll show on my side. If my AirPods case is the what's it, the hole of the tenor saxophone, where
the horn,
I would assume,
or it's actually called the bell.
The bell. I would assume that it would be perhaps maybe a little below, something like this, below, in front of
you would want to, I've experimented with different. The one thing you don't want to do is just shove the mic into the bell, like you don't, because then you're just getting a bunch of like low end and wind, and like it basically needs to be sort of back out of the bell and slightly up, because when you listen to a tenor saxophone player play, what's one thing you hear other than the sound of the horn? You hear the clicking of this of the fingers. So sort of at the top rim of the bell, in between the top rim of the bell, like, and the keys, and a little back. So if this is the bell right here, maybe like that. And another thing is that one thing that a lot of people don't do, that I'm gonna preach here. I'm gonna preach. Young engineers, use your room. I don't care how small it is. Use your room. Because when my friend Abby here listens to a tenor sax player play horn, she doesn't stick her ear into the bell of the horn and listen like that. She listens from 6 feet away or 10 feet away or however far you are. So put something close to the horn, put a distance mic, put a room mic, 10 feet back, 6 feet back. Use your room. Don't put it in the corner. Use your ears almost like a detector. If you walk around the room, it sounds so simple, but most people just don't do it. If you walk around the room and you listen, oh, the horn sounds great right here. Put your mic there. The mic is acting like your ear. So a lot of times what I'll do is, if I don't know how to mic something, I'll literally turn my ear and I'll move my head around the instrument, whatever it is, until it sounds good. And then I'll like put my hand like this and turn my head and see, okay, where is this? And then I'll put the mic where my ear was, and I'll start there. That's if I don't know how to mic something. Be careful if you're doing that to a snare drum.
Yeah. This is not for snare drums, but for tenor saxophones, absolutely.
When you mic a violin, most people take the mic and they stick it right on top of the violin. So when somebody's playing like this, there's a mic somewhere up here, right? What most people don't do is take a mic and flip the phase and put it on the bottom underneath the body of the violin. Like if I was holding the violin, this mic would be underneath the violin and getting the body. All of the low end, all of the wood, all of that comes from the back. It's unbelievable. You'd be amazed the difference. And just adding that second mic and making sure the phase is correct. So you basically have two mics that are like this on top of each other with the violin in between. That's something I didn't discover on my own. I saw somebody do it. And as soon as I said, wow, I'm going to try that. And as soon as I tried it, I went, holy crap, listen to the difference, and you have to remember to flip the phase, obviously, and check your phase relationships. But unbelievable, the difference. I didn't have to do anything to it. The sound was so good. If I wanted more low end, I turn up the bottom mic. If I want more high end, I turn up the top mic. It was great. Another one that's an interesting thing to mic is tuba. The best way to do it is to take a 57. It sounds so stupid, but it's the best sounding way to do it. Take a 57 and put it down inside of the entire bell of the sousaphone to where it's like the wire's literally hanging out.
Really?
Yeah. And then that gets all the low end. And then take something like an RE20 or a condenser mic or whatever, and then put it on a stand. So if this was the tuba, by the way, this is an ancient artifact.
Yes.
If this was the tuba, you'd put, the mic like that, outside of the bell, but inside of the bell all the way down, or taped on the inside is a 57 or a 421 or something like that, just completely inside the bell.
I would love to see that being recorded in person. That sounds fascinating. And I also want to say, we got to shout out the CD for the kids below the age of whatever. It's a
little shiny disc. It's
a little shiny disc that it's from way back when. Oh my God, those stands. I may be a little bit young, but I still remember Blockbusters.
Oh my gosh.
And getting scratch CDs.
I would go to Blockbuster. As a kid, every Friday night was Blockbuster. I'm a huge cinemaphile, like so. I love movies and stuff. I would say a third of my business is, film and TV music. So I would say that my corporation is something like a third live, a third producing, directing, mixing, mastering, engineering bands, and a third composition and mixing and mastering of movies, film, TV, score kind of stuff.
That's so cool. I actually the other day spoke to a guy who composes ads, and it was my first. He composes music for ads, so it was my first exposure to the approach for sound when it comes to film and TV, and I was like, my mind was blown.
I do stuff like that. I've done stuff for. I've done ads for. I wrote the music for Crystal Hot Sauce, for Mountain Dew, for Mercedes Benz. Obviously, Ford, and I mean, I've also, and then me and my team, we would do. We have a lot of stuff on TV that we work with the Script Network and Animal Planet and History Channel and I'm trying to think of like OWN and stuff like that. So like we did all the music for one of the seasons of Talas and Tiaras and Anthony Bourdain's The Layover and stuff like that. So we get a lot of those types of accounts too. I'm working on a crime show right now that's going to be on Fox. I think no, I'm sorry, WB. It's because, and the reason why I don't remember is because it's through an agency. So the agency calls me and they're like, "Hey, we need 10 cues that are spooky sort of crime cues for this upcoming show." And I'm like, "All right, well, what's the show?" And I go, "Oh, they don't even really have a name for it yet. It's going to be this." Like, so it's all stuff that's like in development, and I'll just do the cue. Okay, how long do they have to be? 2 minutes. Okay, and what do you want them to sound like? We want them to sound somewhere between whatever Unsolved Mysteries and Stranger Things. And okay, great. And so you just do cues and you send them in and they go, "Great, these are great." Edit them down, send us the stems, and then they implement them however they see fit.
That's fascinating. It's like a whole other world. I really like, ever since like chatting with him and now like chatting with you about it, I really kind of want to dedicate more time also on the podcast to getting to know the people who are the gods of film and TV music. It's a whole other universe.
Are you a player? Do you play?
I started off before I got into audio as a guitar player.
Nice. Well, yeah, those things and those types of things, it just depends. It depends on the project. A lot of it is just done in my home studio. I mean, I've got, if I could, down at my feet, I've got a 10 pedal guitar pedal board set up with like amps with heads and like all this stuff, like just already mic'd and ready to go. Drum pads, keyboards, pianos. I have a grand piano downstairs that's mic'd permanently. Like it just depends on what I'm doing. And that's another thing that I learned from the Lanois style of production is he thought that the setup took away from the creativity process. So people would get ideas, and by the time we were able to get set up and get sounds, those ideas had cooled. So what he liked to do was to have things mic'd, set up, and ready to go at all times and patched in. And the drums were the drums. They sounded like they sounded. It wasn't like, "Oh, I want the drums to sound more like this record or that, right?" It's like, no, the drums sound like they sound. Sit down and play. And that's how they would do it. So I try to implement some of that. Like at my studio in New Orleans, the B3 is always mic'd. The Rhodes is always mic'd. The piano is permanently mic'd. I have anything in the room that is not has to be struck is mic'd and already has dedicated mic pre's and it stays mic'd.
That's such a great piece of advice also to add on to what you said for new producers and engineers, like anyone that's able to do that. Like you said, not to let the creativity slip away. So I'm going to definitely take note of that for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, most people are like, "Okay, I have a home studio. I don't need more than 2 mic pre's." Okay, that may be true, but if you have 3 different keyboards, I have a Juno, I have an old Roland XP60, and I have a Kronos. Okay. Do you really want to be behind those things, flipping the whatever, just if you got one of those octopres and just plugged in each one of the keyboards and you only use six of the pre's, now you still have two open, but the three keyboards are now permanently mic'd in. Now you have to have enough converters to do this, obviously. I have a couple of Personas Quantums that are great. The converter in them is great. They're quiet. And I have one that is, I think is it 32? It is. It's 32 in and out in one RU. So it's all DB25 on the back. And so I have in my studio, just at my house, I have something like 40 channels of input. I have a patch bay and a 16 channel snake here. So what I'll do is keep things plugged into the snake, and then I'll just go into the patch bay and do this. But most people at their house don't have a patch bay. So if you don't have a patch bay, then I would keep things permanently plugged in to try and keep your workflow as smooth as possible. Because I don't know about you, but a lot of times, like when I have to do like, session guitar playing for people or whatever, the thing that makes me drag my feet in the mud the most is the physical setting up of all the crap. So I have amps that are permanently mic'd, pedal boards ready to go. I have closets full of different types of guitars, and if I just have to plug in and do it.
I'm going to definitely, that's going to be, that like for myself is a huge takeaway from this episode, keeping the workflow flowing, also for future sessions. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Definitely going to take that down for myself. To kind of sum up everything we spoke about, I always love to ask our amazing guests to either drop a piece of advice or anything you'd like to say or freestyle to the amazing Safari Pedal Studio Animal viewer. So do you got something that you'd like to say to the people?
My biggest piece of advice to you would be to always bet on yourself. If you have the determination to do this, then do it. It is possible. It's not something that has to be a hobby, or it can be a career, but you have to also treat it like a career. You have to, like, even if you don't report to a boss, if you don't report to a corporation, but you're a freelance engineer or producer or whatever, set an alarm clock, get up in the morning, get dressed, even if you have nowhere to be, make calls. This thing right here, it's not just a phone, it's an ATM machine. Make calls, get the work. You can do it, and invest in yourself, because everybody who told you that you can't do it, or that you need to get a real job, or that you need to have something to fall back on, ignore that. Because there are going to be people who are going to tell you that. You can do this and make it a career. I've been doing this for, like I said, almost 30 years now, almost 25 years as a producer and almost 35 years as a player. And I've never been out of work. Even during COVID, the gigs dried up for live, but I was busier than ever working out of my house. People from around the country sending me mixes. Make sure that you do great work, care about your work, and care about the product as if it were your own. Because if you just cut corners, then you're going to have a product with cut corners. Go back to the well and keep doing it as much as you can, because practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. If you take things and you do them incorrectly over and over and over and over again, you're going to become ingrained to do those things incorrectly over and over and over again. Try to learn the proper way to do things. And even if it's difficult, like I had to relearn certain things about my mixing, like routing and things like that I was doing incorrectly. And it was very difficult for me. I didn't like it, and it wasn't comfortable, and it slowed down my process, but I wanted to learn the right way. So therefore, I forced myself to do it the right way. And now the right way is instinctual.
That was amazing. I got to give a clap to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I especially love what you said about just doing the thing and not kind of blocking out all of the noise of, get a real job and da-da-da and fall back. And I think that's so relevant, especially this being like a show that's centered around starting out. I absolutely love that piece of advice.
I don't mean to get too self-righteous here, but I came from nothing. My family had no money. I'm not one of these trust fund kids. I'm not somebody who, oh, I think it'd be fun to own, an LA two-way. I'll go drop 3 grand. Like everything that I have, I worked for. I am self-made. I am, and my wife too. She's somebody who we came up both as kids with nothing. I had to work study to go to high school because I went to a private school, but I had to work my way through high school. I put myself through college, and I didn't graduate because by the time I got to my junior year, all I had left was math and Englishes and science. And what I wanted was I was a jazz performance major. I wanted the music courses and I was done with all those. So I was like, all right, I just wanted the information. I didn't care about the degree because what are you going to do with a jazz performance degree? The same thing I was already doing, gig, So I was like, I don't want to put the time in to just get this piece of paper that nobody's going to care about. I'm not telling you that that's the way to go, but that's how I felt. So anything like that, it can be done. You can make a career out of this. And it's something, like I said, it's for 30 years I've been doing this and you really can. But every day I am relentless. I get up every day and I work the phone. I work the internet. I work my mixes. I work my compositions. Even if I don't have anything to do, I'll come upstairs and I'll write something and record it. And it might get used on a TV show. It might get I just recently sold for a good deal of money, a piece of music that I wrote years ago that was sitting in my hard drive doing nothing because it was something I wrote when I was bored one day. And it just sat there and it was like this little stock collecting money, and they said, hey, do you have something that sounds like this? It's worth this much money. And, we need it for this show. And I said, let me check. And I was like, oh, I have this piece of music. And they go, oh, we love this. And they wanted to buy it. Cool. It's been sitting there for 5 years. And another thing, I do have one more piece of advice. You need to treat yourself like a business. Like you as an individual need to become a product, a business. Like you're Pepsi Cola now. Abby the producer is not the same thing as Abby the person. Abby the producer is a product. She's somebody who has a quantifiable result when she produces records. And along with that comes a brand and a business. And you need to understand that you as an individual, if you're going to be self-employed, you need to become a brand, and that brand needs to be worked just like every other brand. So there are things like PR meetings, even if you have to have these meetings with yourself, accounting meetings, future work meetings, booking meetings, like things like, okay, August is looking slow. How are we going to generate rain? Another big piece of advice that'll help you with this is, like I said earlier in the show, you got to hang out. You have to hang out. You have to go and you have to make the connections and network and make the friends you have to be likable. People have to be able to sit in a room with you for 12 hours, So you're a producer. If people can't stand to be in a room with you, how are they going to hire you? Even if you're a genius, your personality and your energy as a human being is just as important as your skill level. I would much rather hire a session guitar player who was fun to be around and who was just delightful and made the session vibe much cooler, even if he wasn't quite as good as this other guy who was a genius, but a complete pain in the ass, and that goes for almost every producer I know. There's a reason why most people in the city get the same calls. They show up on time, they're prepared, they're fun to be around, they don't stink in the studio, physically and figuratively. They're good for a few laughs. They're efficient. All of those things. Those are parts of a business model. Like when you go to get your oil changed or whatever it is that you're going to do, you expect a certain degree of efficiency. Okay, they took my car with this amount of time. I only had to wait X amount of thing. They did it. They asked me if I wanted something to drink. They were polite. And you'll keep going back to the same person to do your oil or whatever over and over and over again. You have to think of yourself like that, except the product is not oil, it's music and art.
I absolutely love that. And I'm going to really, on a personal level, take that for myself, especially, being so new to the industry and business and getting set up and established. I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm definitely going to take that for myself. And I think all the amazing Studio Animal viewers watching are also going to do the same.
Set yourself up either an S Corp or an LLC. Incorporate yourself. It needs to happen because like I said, You want to be in this business, you got to be a business. Everybody says, "Oh, I want to be in the music business." It's like, well then, okay, well then let's start talking about the business end of things. You need to be familiar with how contracts work. You need to be familiar with how the point system works. You need to be familiar with how these types of publishing deals and licensing deals work, and sync licensing and all of, mechanical licensing and all of that stuff. And you need to be a business so that when somebody wants to pay you, you don't end up, taking it, from behind in taxes every year because you weren't incorporated. You're a producer, you hire people, I'm sure at some point, to come work on your tracks. You need to have a system where W-9s are issued to everybody so that you can 1099 people at the end of the year. And that's a write-off for you. But you can't do that if you're not a business.
Yeah, we can't commit tax fraud by accident. Absolutely not.
Well, you don't want to take the tax hit either for something that you didn't get paid for. Because this is something that happens to me a lot, where the artist will come to me. It's very common. The artist will come to me and they want me to produce. I need a drummer, a piano player, guitar player, bass player, and background singers. Okay. And I'm the one who finds everybody. I find everybody. Well, the client doesn't pay them individually. They pay me and I pay them. So they don't want to have to write checks to every single person and, oh, who's this guy? What does this guy get? And who knows? Maybe the piano player is not getting paid the same thing as the guitar player, because the guitar player, is whatever. Hey, I got Johnny Greenwood on the session from Radiohead, but the piano player is a local guy, but Johnny Greenwood wanted more money or whatever. I don't know Johnny Greenwood. I'm just using it as an example. You don't want the client having to deal with that and the embarrassment of possibly, well, wait, what's he getting paid? Like, that's why the producer handles that type of thing, and they pay me and I pay them, and everybody gets issued, the proper tax forms. So those are the types of things where if you really want to be a producer, you really want to be an engineer, is to also understand the definitions of the differences of what a producer is versus an engineer. You have to, that's another thing that we didn't even really get into is to understand how are those things different. An engineer is somebody that deals with the sonics and the quality of the recording, but there's so many things to producing that's more than just writing and recording music. The producer is, it's a guy who basically needs to have a lack of executive dysfunction and basically tell everybody what to do. They need to be somebody who works with the song, somebody who works with the artist. They need to be budget and scheduling, hiring and firing. They're dealing with the labels and dealing with their timelines. Songwriting and editing, team management, the whole thing. So there's a whole lot that you need to learn, and you need to be the head of that business.
I gotta get that LLC, Abby Incorporated, y'all. Stay tuned.
There you go.
Absolutely.
There you go.
For sure. And I really appreciate you just hopping on and sharing all this valuable information. Thank you so much. I learned a ton from this episode, and I just
thank you.
Wait.
And I hope I didn't, I hope I didn't pontificate too much. I don't mean to come off as sanctimonious.
No, not at all. You shared, the fact of the matter, as they say, and also just tons of valuable information that I can't wait to start applying in my career/life. So thank you so much. And
well, thank you for having me, Abby.
I appreciate it. Guys, I'm going to link all of Jack's links below in the description, social media, website, everything, so you know where to find him. And thank you so much again for hopping on.
Thank you so much, Abby. And thank you to your listeners and watchers. And I really appreciate you and everything that you've done.
Yeah, he trailing behind. This in his games, but I stay on my grind. I told my family we all got me fine.